Welcome to the second training in this series on how to design can-do self-assessments for your language learners. In this training, you'll have the opportunity to take a self-assessment before learning about the specific uses and benefits of implementing self-assessments into your own language classroom, as well as some important considerations for maximizing those benefits. Most importantly, you will learn how to design your own locally relevant self-assessments for your language classroom. And we will also take a brief look at some open educational resource projects which support the use of self-assessment in the language classroom. This training is designed to help you as a language teacher gain an understanding of the purpose as well as the benefits of self-assessment in the language classroom, and also to empower you to design your own locally relevant self-assessments and to train your students to use them. By the end of the presentation, you should be able to articulate the role and limitations of self-assessment in the classroom, explain the benefits of self-assessment for both learners and teachers, and explain how to train students to use can-do self-assessment. So what are language self-assessments? Self-assessments are precisely what their name entails: assessments which require the learner to reflect on and to judge their own abilities rather than to rely on external judgment. For language learning, this means learners are reflecting on their ability to comprehend or to communicate with the language. Self-assessment requires learners to take a more active role in their learning than some more traditional forms of assessment. Self-assessments are an assessment for learning as well as of learning, meaning that they're not only measuring growth, but they're also fostering continued learning. They can be used to facilitate initial program placement or as a regular part of formative assessment within a language program to measure students' proficiency growth over time. It's important to note that they do not replace direct assessment, but they complement it, and they have unique benefits which make them worthy of inclusion within a language program. They're best used as a low-stakes assessment in conjunction with other assessment methods. It's also worthy to note here that not all self-assessments are designed with can-do statements, but since there are unique benefits to both learners and instructors which are afforded by the use of can-do self-assessment, especially for language learning, this is the specific focus of this training. Before we jump into discussing how to design self-assessments and understanding their benefits and limitations, it helps to have some experience taking a self-assessment to familiarize yourself with the process, as well as to put yourself in your learner's shoes. Here you'll find links to two different free online self-assessments. The first one was developed by the European Center for Modern Languages of the Council of Europe, and it assigns the user a level based on the levels described in the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. It will give you a rating in listening, reading, spoken interaction, spoken production, and writing. The second one was developed by researchers at Michigan State University as a self-assessment instrument for the Michigan State University Language Proficiency Flagship Initiative. It will give you a recommended level for the ACTFL OPIC test by giving you an estimated range on the ACTFL proficiency scale, which would correspond to the appropriate OPIC test level. Pause this presentation and take a few moments to take both assessments. You can take them for any language other than your native language. So if you have learned more than one additional language, feel free to choose which language you want to assess or to take them once for each language you have learned. Once you're done, reflect on your experience. What did you like and what did you not like about the format of these self-assessments? Do you feel the results were an accurate reflection of your language skills? Would these assessments be relevant to your learners? Why or why not? Now that you've taken a self-assessment and reflected on that process, let's discuss the benefits of using self-assessment in the language classroom. First, let's take a look at some of the learner benefits. Remembering that self-assessments can be used to facilitate initial program placement or as a regular part of formative assessment within a language program, it's important to note that the benefits to learners primarily come with the repeated use of formative self-assessments rather than when it is used for placing learners into a program. When self-assessment becomes a regular part of a learner's language education, it allows learners themselves to take charge of and to track their progress in an intentional, measured way, thus developing their agency over their learning. Self-assessments which use easy-to-understand statements, like can-do statements, also help demystify the process of developing language proficiency. Students can see their growth taking place incrementally, and they likewise become more aware of the features of their own language, which leads to improved communication. In being able to track their gains, they consistently set goals, and this in turn increases learner motivation and engagement. Explicit learner reflection on their language learning is also a valuable part of self-assessment because it requires the learner to articulate their learning experience. The practice of self-assessing in itself requires reflection on one's abilities, but when self-assessments include overt reflective sections, learners are further encouraged to take accountability for their continued growth. In addition to the numerous learner benefits, there are a number of instructional benefits which come from the use of self-assessment both for formative and placement purposes. Self-assessments are relatively quick and easy to administer and grade, and as you will learn in this training, they are not overly difficult to design. In terms of both development and administration, they are cost-effective. It is possible that a series of self-assessments developed for formative use within separate courses could serve as a placement assessment for a program as a whole. Templates can also be reused so that minimal changes need to be made to create an entirely new self-assessment. Once a teacher has structured their curriculum around clear communicative objectives and has articulated these through can-do statements, the creation and administration of self-assessments based on the goals for each course within a program becomes a fairly straightforward task. Learners can see upfront what they will be working on and how their classroom tasks relate to their assessments and communicative development. Aggregate data from formative self-assessments can also help guide curricular decisions, since teachers can see which objectives may require additional practice in class, or even which objectives are of greater importance to learners if such information is also requested in the assessment or addressed in the reflections. Having now discussed the benefits of self-assessment, let's take a look at some important considerations for designing and implementing self-assessments. There are some simple steps we can take to ensure that the self-assessments we create and implement in our language programs are measuring for proficiency and are doing so in a way that maximizes the accuracy of their results. First, I'd like to address the question of measuring performance versus proficiency. Within the ACTFL performance descriptors, performance versus proficiency assessment is presented as a dichotomy. We see in this table how they are contrasted from one another, with performance assessment being based on instruction and familiar content, and proficiency assessment being unconnected to specific instruction and requiring spontaneous performance as opposed to rehearsed situations. As we have discussed in this presentation, self-assessment can be used both for placement into a language program or for formative assessment. In the case of placement assessment, it is clear that we are assessing for proficiency independent of specific instruction. However, with formative use of self-assessment, our assessment tasks are directly aligned with our curriculum. It would seem then that designing self-assessments based off of classroom tasks would inevitably negate their use in measuring proficiency within a classroom setting. Yet I would argue that this is not quite so clear-cut a division, but rather a more nuanced relationship. Learners' proficiency development is a result of their language exposure and practice. Therefore, if we assess them on tasks which are wholly unfamiliar to them, we may not get an accurate measurement of their abilities. In can-do self-assessments, learners should be guided to reflect on their ability to consistently perform a task, rather than to base their self-evaluation ratings on having been able to successfully complete a task once. As we design self-assessments, we need to keep in mind the clarity of our instructions, the training of our learners, and the purpose of the assessments themselves to support the effective measurement of learners' proficiency development, rather than solely their practice performances. In order to increase the accuracy and utility of self-assessment results, we need to keep several things in mind. Self-assessments are useful when their purpose is clear and they are used appropriately. They are not meant to provide accurate measurements which correspond with letter grades, but rather to show individual learners' growth over time or a group's development as a whole, to guide placement within a program, and to gather data to guide curricular choices. They are a low-stakes assessment which should be used in partnership with other assessment tools to provide a holistic picture of learner growth. They are not intended to be used for high-stakes testing, nor for the assignment of grades, nor for accurate measurements of a learner's ability at a given moment in time. Teachers need to explain the purpose of the self-assessment to their learners and also to allow students the opportunity to practice self-assessing. This practice can take place in many forms. Teachers may choose to introduce self-assessment in the form of an exit ticket at the end of the class by asking students to assess their ability to complete the daily lesson objective using the same scale they will ultimately use on their larger self-assessment. Or it may mean actually providing the full self-assessment, walking students through it step by step, and then having them complete the process of self-assessing regularly to gain confidence in the practice. Clarity of directions on the self-assessment is also crucial. Finally, teachers need to provide ample feedback to students on their self-assessments to help them grow in their practice. In addition to providing training and practice in self-assessment, the other major component in improving the accuracy of results is having clear and relevant test items. Learners cannot be expected to accurately self-assess their abilities and progress if the test items do not pertain to their learning context. If students do not have clarity over what the test item is asking, and they cannot envision themselves carrying out that task, then their response is unlikely to accurately represent their ability, and they may end up over-assessing or under-assessing their abilities. This clarity of test items then comes back to teachers understanding proficiency development, utilizing appropriate resources, such as the ACTFL Educator resources, and also having training on how to write clear, specific, and measurable objectives which directly connect to classroom communicative tasks. For help in writing clear and measurable objectives, refer to the Can-Do statement training. Now that you have a solid understanding of the ways in which self-assessments can support your instruction and help your learners develop, and the important considerations for using them effectively, we can dive into how to actually design your own locally relevant self-assessments. Let's take a look at how to clarify instructions for learners, guidelines for organizing your can-dos, how to create your response scale, how to score the self-assessment, and how to provide feedback. Whether you start from a template or create your own self-assessment from scratch, you will have to make a number of decisions before you hand it over to your learners to use. However, once you've created your first self-assessment, it will be relatively easy to create additional assessments using the same format. You will typically only have to make minor adjustments to the instructions and grading, while the response scales and reflection and feedback sections will likely remain unchanged. The can-dos which you put into your self-assessments are the part that will change to reflect your particular unit or course objectives. The first sections of your self-assessment which you need to design are the instructions and grading sections. Part of training learners to self-assess is providing clarity of instructions and expectations on the assessment itself, so that is the purpose of these sections. Learners must be made explicitly aware of the purpose of self-assessment and what you expect from them in terms of their responses. Students may not be used to sharing responsibility for their own assessment, so being clear about what you expect, as well as how to use the tool, is what you are providing in this section. Students need to understand when they will be self-assessing, and that they are rating their ability to consistently carry out a language task, rather than to do it only once. The focus should be on their honest answers and reflection, and the difference between self-assessment and self-grading will need clarification. Learners need to be told that they are not graded on how high they rate themselves, but on how honestly and reflectively they complete their assessment. Be sure to clarify for your learners what you want them to write about in their reflection and how long their reflection should be. It's up to the teacher how they assign point values to each of the sections, but one way to do it would be to assign 1 point for completion of each task rating, and then a comparable number of points for the written reflection. Regardless of the points assigned, the emphasis is on completion rather than on the student's rating. In this example, which is shown here, you'll see that the assessment is being given in weeks 1 and 10 of the semester, once towards the start and once at the end of the term. But this should be adjusted to fit the goals and needs of each specific course. Another consideration in the design of the self-assessment is how you want students to rate themselves. How many response options do you want, and how will you word them? Self-assessments typically use a Likert scale for responses, ranging from "I cannot do this yet" to "I can do this on my own." But the wording you choose is up to you. Typically, between 3 to 5 choices is ideal. It is also recommended that response choices for items use neutral phrasing. Note the inclusion of the word "yet" in the first choice. Rather than simply say, "I cannot do this," we include the word "yet" to foster a growth mindset. Likewise, the use of images to visually represent the response choices should also be neutral. Once you have chosen your initial response scale for the self-assessment tasks, you may also choose to include a corresponding question for each statement asking learners to identify the level of importance of a given task to their own life as language learners. For example, choices might include things such as, "This is important to me," or "This is important to my family," or "to my teacher," or "to my future learning." These responses are independent of proficiency measurement, but they do provide data regarding task importance, which may then inform curricular decisions about which content is most relevant to students. Having discussed how to design the instructions, grading, and response scale, let's look at the reflection and feedback sections. The reflection is what is completed by the learner, whereas the feedback is done by the teacher. Your instructions and grading section will already clarify your expectations for learners regarding what they are to include in their reflections, but it is wise to repeat those expectations in the reflection section as well. Learners should be asked to reflect on the process of self-assessing, their successes or challenges with specific communicative tasks, their goals for future language development, and anything else you feel is relevant or necessary to their growth. Explicit reflection encourages learners to not just check off a box, but to think through their self-ratings and their feelings about the learning and assessment process. The feedback section gives the teacher the opportunity to respond to not only the learner's ratings, but also their comments. Perhaps you, as the teacher, disagree with their assessment regarding a particular task, or perhaps you can offer specific suggestions to support their goals. It is important that learners' reflections are valued so that they feel it's worth their time to complete that section honestly and thoroughly, and a teacher's feedback is an important way in which learners' concerns can be addressed and their achievements can be recognized. The final piece to designing your self-assessment is writing and organizing your can-do statements. The effectiveness of your self-assessment tool depends a lot on the clarity and relevance of your can-do statements. Learners need to be able to envision the task to accurately assess their ability to complete it. Therefore, the writing and organization of these statements is a crucial step in designing your self-assessment. However, it can very well be the final step, since the rest of the test design is independent of the statements themselves. If you need further guidance on how to write specific and measurable can-dos, please see the accompanying tutorial. After you've written your statements, then you must organize them within the assessment itself. The ordering of test items should align with the complexity of the tasks they represent. Typically, the order in which tasks are presented in class will guide the order of the test items, since tasks that are lower in difficulty are typically presented before tasks with increasing complexity. It's also helpful to identify tasks which may represent the next proficiency sublevel. For example, if 8 out of 10 of your tasks are for novice low proficiency, and the final 2 tasks are for novice mid, identifying this on your self-assessment can help your learners recognize their own proficiency development along the continuum. 10 statements per assessment is a good goal, although this is not a hard and fast rule. Choose the number of statements which best represent the major communicative goals you have for your course or unit. The goal is to help students measure their overall growth throughout a unit or course, so it's okay if not every task is listed. Choose what you think is most important. If you are using self-assessments for program placement, you will want to write 10 statements per course and then put those assessments together to create a broader placement test. It's recommended that learners who report they can fully complete tasks on at least 8 out of the 10 tasks for a given level be given the subsequent assessment. In other words, a learner who reports they can confidently complete all of the novice level tasks independently for a level 1 course would be given the statements for the intermediate low course. And then if they report confidence in those tasks, they would then be given the statements for the intermediate mid-level course, and so on until their level is determined for placement. Despite the research that advocates for the use of self-assessment in the language classroom as a valuable tool for low-stakes assessment, one of the obstacles to increasing the use of self-assessment remains a lack of training for teachers and access to tools which will support their development. This presentation, along with the accompanying can-do statement presentation and materials, seek to address this need for more teacher training, and hopefully you are already feeling more confident in both of these areas. Let's look at 2 open educational resource projects devoted to expanding the use of self-assessment in the language classroom. The Local Lictal Assessments Project, also known as LOLA, which is through the National Less Commonly Taught Languages Resource Center housed at Michigan State University, and the self-assessment project being designed by the Spanish General Education Program at the University of Iowa. The LOLA project's purpose is to create open educational resource assessment template kits for less commonly taught language instructors, the first of which is a self-assessment template kit. The LOLA project is headed by Dr. Paula Winke at Michigan State University. Dr. Winke identified a need for locally designed assessment materials to meet the unique needs of Lictal teachers. Unlike with more commonly taught languages, the progression of tasks for a given proficiency level within standardized assessments may not always fit the natural progression of learning within Lictal programs. And as previously explained, self-assessment items must be clear and relevant to learners in order for them to accurately measure proficiency levels and development. So LOLA seeks to meet this need by empowering Lictal teachers to develop their own locally relevant self-assessments. The goals for LOLA's materials to support Lictal programs in developing self-assessments which can be used to guide program placement, as well as for formative assessment within courses. Although LOLA's materials are specifically designed to benefit Lictal teachers, Their materials may be of general use to any language teacher or program seeking to design and implement self-assessment. These resources were, in fact, inspired by the LOLA project and are meant to complement the resources being developed for that project. Like the LOLA project, the Self-Assessment Project by the Spanish General Education Program at the University of Iowa also aims to support an increased use of self-assessment in language programs. However, the University of Iowa project has its origins rooted in meeting an assessment need within the university itself. In 2019, the program began having its students self-assess using actual can-do statements to gather more data about whether students were leaving courses having met the learning objectives. The program began using a paper-based assessment, but the data was not easily managed. In an effort to track students' growth, the program developed an online assessment through their LMS. They also included a reflective component. Due to issues with the LMS assessment and challenges with analyzing the data, the program ultimately decided to develop a web-based app, which would facilitate data management as well as make the application available outside of the university. The source code for the self-assessment app is to be made available publicly via GitHub, with the hope that it will be utilized by other programs and institutions. If you are interested in using this tool within your school or organization, you can go to the University of Iowa's website or contact the Center for Language and Culture Learning at the University of Iowa to learn more about it. Although the LOLA project and the University of Iowa project differ in their designs, their delivery, and their original motivation for creation, they both seek to increase the use of self-assessment within language programs. In consideration of the efforts of the aforementioned open educational resource projects, the training in which you are participating seeks to build upon the discoveries and the identified needs of those two projects and to add to the resources available for language teachers in the field of self-assessment. That being said, let's recap what we have learned in this training today. Self-assessment does not replace direct assessment, it complements it. Self-assessment has many benefits for learners as well as instructors, and it's relatively easy to implement. Self-assessments which use can-do statements based on classroom communicative tasks provide insight into proficiency growth. Can-do statements in the assessment need to be clear and relevant in order for learners to accurately measure their abilities. Learners must be trained on the use of self-assessment, and test format and grading must be clarified. And finally, reflection and feedback are integral to fostering language growth and to ensuring that the self-assessment process is meaningful for both learners and educators. These are the references that informed the design of this training. If you'd like to learn more about implementing self-assessment into your classroom, check out these links from Education Corner and the New South Wales Government. Now it's your turn. It's my hope that from this training, you feel confident about developing your own locally relevant self-assessment tools. Check out the step-by-step teacher guide to creating your can-do self-assessments, as well as the template and provided example. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this presentation or about language self-assessment in general, please feel free to reach out.